I don't know if you've got a flavour of that call from Barry. The idea of a performance-related pay sounds great. I'm struggling to understand how it would work. But before you attempt to answer it, perhaps you can just give me a general view on politicians' pay in this country, because in fairness to them, they don't decide the pay, do they?
Well, they don't, no. We spend about £60 million a year financing the salaries of MPs. If you take into account also expenses, that goes up about another £50 million. So it costs about £110 million to run the key legislature. That's not taking into account staffers, not taking into account other expenses. So, you know, having a legislature is very expensive, but it's also incredibly important. And that's why I'm of the belief, an institute of the belief, that we should be paying our politicians a lot more than we already do.
How do we compare, so, for example, with a senator or a congressman or shall we say, other democracies around the world? I think we're one of the lower paid ones compared to Europe.
Certainly are. We certainly are. Well, I look at the US. I mean, I was in DC a couple of months ago out on business, and you know, I had a meeting with a few staffers and a couple of representatives, and what I saw was that, and you'll know this from experience in Parliament, Nick. You know, a representative from North Carolina has 8 members of staff in his office. 8. Meanwhile, you know, I know MPs with only 1 member of staff in their office. So that's not a really good way of doing it. In fact, staffers in the US can be paid up to $160,000 a year. That's the cap. Whereas, you know, most members of staff at in Parliament aren't making more than 30 grand a year. So I think we politicise it so much with such penury, and you wonder why we get the quality of laws coming out of Parliament that we do.
So after the expenses scandal in 2010, which I don't think anyone's going to disagree was a real disgrace. It exposed lots of flaws. We don't have to debate that. But the public effectively demanded that MPs had no control over their expenses or their pay. What went wrong with the idea that, having granted the public their wishes, the MPs are still getting the blame?
I think it's just down to political reaction, to be honest. I mean, I was looking on the X post that talkTV put up before coming on here, and there's someone in the comments saying that we should be paying politicians minimum wage, and I just can't think of anything more ludicrous than that. Even some people are suggesting that we shouldn't pay them at all. They should do it out of the kindness of the heart. It's just fantasy. We should be paying our politicians like they pay them in Singapore, for example, $250,000 a year. Ministers get paid over $1 million a year, because, as you all know, you know, it's Barry in the last call said, you know, politicians aren't saving lives. Well, they're in charge of the country. They're voting on pieces of legislation. They're running a budget of the country of over $800 billion a year. That's larger than most companies in the world, never mind, you know, just in the British economy. So these are basically high-level executives who also have to work basically all week. They're under media scrutiny all the time for everything they say, everything they do. So why would a high-performing professional in the city or elsewhere in the country want to give up their job to come and, you know, be under the microscope for a 5-year term, I think, without proper compensation?
Well, funny enough, I was about to divorce the pay from the scrutiny, because actually, I think if you offered to pay me now 150,000, 200,000, and I was on about 65 back in my day, which it was a decent whack, but it was less than I was actually earning from my business and my company, and I was doing it for different reasons. But the bottom line is, I don't think I would tolerate now, or even wish to tolerate, not the scrutiny so much as the abuse that you're getting as MPs. And okay, maybe people think I'm a bit thin-skinned, but that to me would put me off much more than the salary if I was doing rather nicely in the private sector. In the public sector, not really facing that scrutiny.
Sure. I mean, I can understand that. I mean, but, you know, some people are happy to take the abuse, some others aren't. I mean, we live in a democracy. I can't really imagine us, you know, having to say, it may be quite a caustic environment on Twitter, for example, but I can't imagine us, you know, speaking of our MPs either in laudatory or unlaudatory terms in Russia or China or, you know, elsewhere. So I think it's unpleasant, of course, but, you know, we live in a democracy. I think that's something to really treasure as hard as it is. And let me tell you, I work at a free market think tank just off Tufton Street. We get it pretty bad as well. So it's part of the process, and we're not paid that well, us think tankers, despite what a lot of people say, but nor are MPs. So I just think Westminster needs a lot more money coming in to really attract the best talent.
So okay, so let's turn our turn our view to solutions. Excuse me there, I don't know where that came from. So let's turn our view to solutions. We're either talking about a huge, massive project to kind of inform, help people understand what is involved in the role and see beyond the politics. And do you think there is a government brave enough to stand up and say something Cameron and Brown never did at the expenses? Look, for all the ghastly stuff you're hearing, this is what they do. This is why it matters. And this is why we need to get behind what I still think is the best system in the world.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that'd be a great idea.
But they won't do it, will they?
Of course they won't do it. I mean, that's applying this kind of thinking here. But, I like what Barry said earlier about performance-related pay. Let's, set up some metrics for, what determines how a MP gets a bonus, for example. What's the economic growth in their constituency? How many more public transport routes are there? Are GPs open longer? Are they servicing more people? Various, public metrics that we could essentially set up like you would have with your KPIs in your company, or, we use OKRs, objectives and key results. Those things could dictate pay as a bonus structure with a higher baseline to really professionalise the pay structures within Westminster. I think we'd see a real improvement actually on the quality.
Let me give you the reason why I don't think that should happen, which is going to make me hugely unpopular, because in principle I see the attraction. The bottom line is, when you elect an MP, the fact is the only people who can hire or fire that person is the electorate. And actually introducing KPIs beyond the judgment of the electorate at every election is making them more of an employee rather than your representative in Parliament. That, to me, is the risk. And if you don't like what they've done and what they're paid, you have the ultimate sanction, without any consultation period, without redundancy, to get rid of them at an election.
Well, I can come back on that and say MPs are elected on a manifesto, and a lot of the time the manifesto, pledges aren't passed through. So you could attach these KPIs to, how many measures in the manifesto are put through. I think it sounds good.
But isn't that what the public do, Maxwell? That's what the public do. If they can hold up that manifesto and say, you didn't deliver, you lied, if you like, I'm not voting for you. But is it the electorate who can't be bothered to do that?
Well, it's up to the electorate to decide that, but I still think MPs should be paid more, and I don't see a problem with tying it to performance. We find ourselves so frustrated all the time that MPs aren't doing X, Y, or Z. Give them more incentive to, because at the moment the incentives aren't working, as you know, Nick.
There you go. Now, do you agree with Maxwell Marlow, from Director of Research at Adam Smith Institute? He gets flack just for being in a think tank.